Hello everyone, my name is Fortune Lovo and welcome to the channel. And so today we'll simply be building a task manager interface. It's going to be a simple one. So without further ado, let's jump straight into it. So this is our folder. I just had it on my desktop there. I'm just going to drop it straight into Visual Studio Code. You can use any text editor you wish. I'm using Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio Code is free, so I recommend it and it's pretty good. I'm happy with it. So our folder is empty right now, so I'm gonna populate it with text files, right? So firstly, HTML file, so index.html, and secondly, script.js, and a folder of CSS, and inside the CSS we have styles.css, being plural. And inside the HTML file, it's just hold down Shift and 1 and then enter. You get this boilerplate code. That's simply just the HTML shell. So we're going to actually link our external files. So that's firstly a CSS. So that's link rel, style sheet, and href, CSS being the folder, styles.css being the actual file that we've created. And we're going to link our JavaScript. So that's script source script.js, and perfect. Name this give it a h1 heading of simply just simple task manager interface. Okay. And now what do we want essentially, like? So before we proceed, it's good practice to test if your external files are working. So within our JavaScript, we can just simply just test it. So by console logging out. So console log hello world, just a test, and h1 color, and let's go live. Perfect. Hello world. Perfect. So what do we want our interface to have? It's going to be a simple to interface, right? So we could have our, well, we could have inputs. So it's basically inputs, right? So individual inputs and a submit button. So when the user actually types in the individual input, then the input would then be essentially generated into the table um, by using the DOM. So specifically, we're going to target the inputs IDs and then use them to display them inside the table. So we can do that by simply creating the inputs firstly. So the first input will be an ID number, input type, number, and we'll give it an ID of ID number. Secondly, task description. Input type, oops, put text. So I'm just gonna move this back there so I have a little bit of space. And we get an idea of task description. Okay. Capital D. Okay, and we might also want breakpoints actually. Just tidy things up a little bit. Copy and paste this, we might need it. Thirdly, we might say the date, so the user might want to have or want to type in the specific date for the task, just as an example. So what we have just done there is we have created another input, and the priority, just in case the user wants to set if the priority is high, medium, or low. Just a preference, really. Add the breakpoints, and maybe add the breakpoints there. And then we're going to have a button, so when this button is clicked, it's actually going to it's going to actually grab the user's input and display it into the table. So it's going to grab the user's input and then display into the table. Okay, so we can create the button now simply using the button tag. It's going to need an onClick, really. It's going to need an onClick event because we want this button to listen for a click, and when it actually is clicked, we're going to pass it a function, and in that function is where we'll have the good stuff, really, of specifically where we are grabbing the user's input. So we can call this function add information. Okay, and then another breakpoint. So now we have our button. When this button is clicked, it's going to grab these inputs and then display them into the table. So we can create our table now. Actually, we're ready. Get an idea of table. And table, so a table td tr table row and th with table heading. So this first heading would be the ID number, of course, but we can copy these firstly. 3, 4. Okay, and the first heading is ID number. Second heading is task description. Third heading is due date. And then priority. And then now for the table body, you can just simply actually use the T body tag, okay? Give it an idea as well, because we're going to target it in JavaScript to do some cool stuff with it. Give it an idea of T body and TR again. Oops. TD. This specific TD is going to have the number 0. But firstly, copy it, paste it, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 0 for the first row ID number, and then task description will say default, since it's going to be the default row. So meaning that anytime we refresh, it's going to be there instantly. And the due date, I would say 12th of May 2022. And priority, just high. We'll say high. Oops. Okay. And now we're gonna add 3 more spaces, right? Because we're gonna add buttons to just kind of make this a bit more fun, a bit more interesting, in fact. And we might also need borders because it might be hard to read. So let's add borders now, actually. So go to our CSS file and we'll say table T H and TD border, say 2 pixels, solid gray. So hash, so 555 for red, green, and blue gives you gray. And don't forget your commas there. Okay, perfect. So there's our 3 slots there. There's nothing there at the moment, but we'll add buttons right now. Okay, so inside them, let's add buttons. So add our button tag, and we'll say button, give it a class of up button, and inside there, and hash, and say 8593. Okay, and that's our up button right there. I'm going to copy this actually. Okay, and then right there, right there. Down button, capital B, camel case, 8595, and then the last one will be the delete. So delete button, and 215. That's cool. That's pretty cool. Okay, so before we move on to JavaScript, where we actually start manipulating, well, grabbing the user's input and then putting them into a function that's being passed to this button. So meaning that when this button is clicked, it's going to grab the user's input and then add it to the end of each row within the table body. So you can tell this is the table body because This is the table body, this tag, and this is the default row. Essentially, this is the default row. So, okay, without further ado, let's jump straight into JavaScript. Okay, we can get rid of hello world for now, console.log, and let's grab our function. So function add information. Oops. Add information. And we can alert to see if this button is working. Alert it works. Okay. So let's refresh. Okay. It works. Cool. So it works. So now let's think of what we need to do. Okay. So what we need to do is we need to grab the user's input and then put him into this button, then put him to the end of the table body. To do that, firstly, let's grab the user's input. So do that by saying let. The first input is, we're going to actually grab it here. So let the ID number equals document dot get element by ID. Dot value, because it's the user's value. And let the task description document dot get element, oops, to get the value. Priority equals document dot get element by ID. The due date. Document dot get element by ID. Due date. The value. Don't forget your semicolon at the end. Okay, we've gotten all of them, yeah. So we got the ID number, task description, due date, priority. Perfect. Okay, now we have the user's value, right? Let's grab the table. Say let table equals document dot get elements by tag name, elements inside the table, okay? And table, and specifically the first one, so 0. 0 is usually 0. 0 is usually the first item, semicolon, and then say let new row equals let new row equals table at dot insert insert cell, so table dot row, dot rows actually, and specifically the length of the table, and semicolon at the end. And now what we want to do is to create the new cells that are going to be inside the new row. Okay, to do that, simply say let cell 1 equals a new row dot insert cell 0. Okay, so that's simply going to insert a cell in each row. Well, insert a cell in the one row really, but it's going to be in each row since each row is going to be created when the button is clicked. Okay, so it's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So now we've created the cells. So now we need to populate these cells with the user's input, right? So to do that, simply just grab each cell and just say dot inner HTML equals. So the first input will be the ID number. And we can test if this is working for us. So add information, and it's not. So we can go right click and inspect. Go to console. So insert cell is not a function. Ah yes. Should be insert row. Insert row. And then so what we have here, what's actually happened is because once we have the user's input, okay, so this is the function. This is the function that's inside this button. Essentially, once I click on this button, this function is called, right? As we said here in our HTML. But if we're in our JavaScript, so inside this function, when the button is clicked, we're gonna grab all the user's input, and then with that user's input, we're also gonna create a new row. We're gonna create a new row, and split and in within the length of the row is based on the cells that we have created. So the 6 cells really. So 1, 2, well 7 really, but because we start from 0, so 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and in each cell we just need to input the user's input, right? And here I had insert cell, and it didn't know, like, we can't really create a new row inside a cell without creating the new row firstly, okay? So we have to create the new row firstly, and in each row, which is actually just the one row, we're creating a cell, and there's 7 cells really in the one row, and in each cell in the one row is going to have the user's input. Okay, so we can task description, due date, the charger in. Okay, so task description and the due date. Okay, excuse me. Priority. Now we have 3 left. And this is where we need to import our bonds, right? So if we just say our words here, so that's number 1, date, medium. Okay, so now 1 is actually inside the cells where the bonds are meant to be. So we can input the cells, right? So let's just go back to our HTML, and to save us time, let's just copy all of this, okay? And then we can simply just paste it here, okay? Inside here, inside cell 5, double quotes, and just grab the button, okay? Just the start and end tags of the button, okay? And change the double quotes inside the double quotes to single quotes. And to test if it's working, just drag over the buttons that we're not using at the moment and just hold Shift Alt A to make a comment, save, and then press add information, and then yeah, we have our button there. Okay, cool. So grab another button, delete that, grab another button, and then lastly a third button. And then again, I'm just going to change our double quotes to single quotes. Okay. So now we have added essentially the user's input into the table. Okay. So when the user types anything here, the value of the user is actually taken. So say information height, and then if I change it to low and change that to a different number, change this to no code, change the date to something like 29, high again, perfect. So now what will be interesting is to actually do something with these buttons, right? So what will be actually cool is to delete each row, because we can add as many as we want, but what will be interesting is to actually delete. So let's try that actually, okay? Let's try it. So to delete it, just thinking now, like before we even code, like logically, what do we need to do? So just thinking logically here, like we might to delete it. So like with the delete button here, and it's inside a cell, and that cell is inside a row, and that's also inside a table, like inside a table, the table element, but also we have a table heading above it. So what we might need to do is to make just the table body listen for a click, and we might have like, if let's say if we have a class that's equal to delete button, we'll then delete the button and its row. Okay, so let's try that. Okay, so just to recap, so what we want to do is delete that button, but to delete that button we might want to say to the table body, okay, so hi table body, please listen for a click, specifically if the delete button is equal to this name, well then delete it and also its parent, essentially its row. Okay, so let's say document dot get element by ID, and let's grab that t body, so t body, and dot add event listener, so it listens for a click and click, and then let's create our anonymous function. So if this bot if whenever there's a click, so it'll pass this function. Okay, so create our function simply by oops. Okay, and let's say if the okay, so the type of event, so if e dot the target dot class name, since the button is a class name, so dot class name is equal to delete button, well then we want to delete it and also its parent. Okay, so to do that we might say e dot target dot parent node dot parent node dot parent node dot remove child e dot target dot parent node dot parent node semicolon Control S, and a bunch of them, and it works. Perfect. So what did we just do? Essentially, to delete the button is it's actually very interesting, because to actually delete it from a row, we need to actually view it from a higher scope, essentially. So we had to go outside of the button and then view it below, and then we're then able to directly see it and then say delete the button and then and its row. So essentially go out of the scope and then specifically delete its row and the button. Okay, so anytime when this button is clicked, everything happens, essentially. Like without, if I don't click this button, nothing happens. The user can type in as much as he or she wants, but once this button is clicked, the magic happens. So what will be interesting now to do is to actually work with these buttons, so which we actually might do in the next movie. So please make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you all on the next movie. Thank you for watching. See you on the next one. It's a wrap.